Living through the Blitz, my mother's story of living through the Battle of Britain during the Second World War in London.
Food was very strictly rationed. They had a book with all sorts of little coupons on, and you got about a square inch of cheese a week, tiny bit of meat, butter, everything was actually rationed, sugar doubly so. But the only thing that you could get almost freely was bread. But that was very nasty bread because it was made with rough things. But you could not buy food without your ration book. So wherever you went, that had to go with you. And the same thing happened with clothes. You had a certain amount of coupons, and when you got through those, which weren't very generous, you couldn't buy any more for the year. The rationing, getting back to the rationing, there was very tiny ration, very tight. But fruit, bananas, young children growing up didn't even know what they were. But if you had a little one in the family, you might occasionally get an orange. But otherwise, everything was very strictly rationed. People would go out and shoot rabbits or anything they could find to extend. And they used to share a pig, perhaps. So officially, it was all done, all recorded, and you had to record what had happened to the pig. And you can imagine there was black market stuff, but ordinary working people like us, we weren't able to cope with black market prices, but I know it went on quite a lot. We all had to go to school. We had our little labels tacked onto us, and our gas masks, and ration books, but they were taken by the adults, and as many clothes as we could take. And we were taken to a station, and we didn't know where we were going, and even our parents didn't know where we were going. But when we got to Sittingbourne, as it was, they couldn't put my sister and I together. So I had to stay in Sittingbourne, and she was taken out to a village, not very far away, but far enough, because we didn't have vehicles then. Ordinary working families just didn't. And my mother could at least get to us once a fortnight to visit. But after having left, the bombs apparently didn't come, and it stayed quiet for a long time. So there was talk of us going home. And one little friend went off, he was only 10, he went home, and his father had a small holding. Went to play down there, and there was a shotgun with one bullet still in it. And one of the kids playing shot him dead. And if only he'd stayed where he was, it would have probably never have happened, but it was very sad. But we did come home, and it stayed quiet for a while. But then parents had to go to work if their children were over 5. They just had to do what they was called their war work. Some of them in factories, some of them had to go further afield, but they were not allowed to stay home unless the child was only 5. So of course they couldn't keep track also of what was going on all the time. But our schooling was so disrupted. We lost all our schooling really, because there were only very few people left at the schools, and we had to go in. The teachers were not the same ones at all, and you lost track of all that you were doing and never really got back on board again. But then the bombing did start, and you'd go to bed and have to get up in the middle of the night when the sirens went, and there was this big hole dug in the garden, covered by really corrugated metal, and then piled on with dirt and stones and things, and sleep down there in light bunks. It was very damp and very uncomfortable and very noisy. The noise was our own guns very often, or the bombs. You really sometimes couldn't tell the difference, but you could hear the aircraft. And they had a distinctive engine. You could pick out a German bomber, you would know it by the sound of its engine. It was a and you knew that that was coming. And then you'd hear the whistle and the bombs coming down. And they used to say you didn't hear the one that hit you, but it could not have been true, because we had a friend along the road, and his sister and brother-in-law, his mum and dad, and 2 little ones were in the shelter, and the shelter got a direct hit, and the 2 babies lived, but all the rest died, and they must have heard it because they all piled on top of the kiddies and their lives were saved. But there were so many bombings, and what they called landmines, they floated down on a parachute, and they were enormous. They went off, they wiped the street out. But of course, compared to today's bombs, they were nothing, I suppose. But it was a very, very hectic time, so they decided we'd all got to go away again. So we debated whether to go to Cornwall or go a bit nearer, so we went to Leighton Buzzard. But then it did quieten down again, so we all came home. We'd had to move house because one day when this family got wiped out along from us, our house had come down too. She'd been in making us drinks and things, and a bomb had hit John's place, and the ceilings were just falling down behind her, and the house was coming down. And of course I'd screamed and thought the next door neighbours thought we'd been hit. But she put up with a lot, but it really broke her nerve being in the tram that got bombed. But it took a while, but in the end she'd had enough. So we again got evacuated to Scotland. But even then, you go on the trains and they're all blacked out, and the names on the stations were not allowed to be shown. And if the train stopped, you didn't know if you were at a station or being stopped because of a bombing raid or that. It was very uncomfortable, very, very slow. But they were not allowed to show any lights whatsoever. And in your own home, you were not allowed to show a light. You had to have blackout curtains and put those up every night. And there were people called wardens, and they'd go along the street, and if there was a tiny crack of light, you shouted, "Put that light out!" Or if you opened the door to let somebody in, it had to be done cautiously, with every bit just covered off so that you couldn't show a great deal of light. But then they were called the air raid wardens, and they kept an eye on the shelters, and when cities got bombed, they directed people quickly as they could to public shelters. But they were not comfortable places. And some people used the London Underground stations as shelters, and they used to sleep on the platforms and even on the rails when the trains stopped coming. And one day there was an alarm, they were going down, I think it was Bethnal Green, excuse me, and there was a panic, and everybody tried to charge down, and there were lots of people killed. That really, it shouldn't have happened. But it wasn't a bomb, it was something they were testing, I think, somewhere, a gun or something. But of course everybody, you're so used to running away from noise, and they all piled down and people got absolutely suffocated, knocked over. It was really dreadful. But the stations were like little homes, you know, they put bunk beds up, and people used to come around with sandwiches and music and singing and everything. And the same thing happened in some caves in Chislehurst. People literally lived in them. They were safe, and they had law and order in there, you might say, because they had medical attention and all the necessary things to keep order, and they'd have wardens to see what was going on. But really, you lived like rats in a trap, really. So, but it was mostly these doodlebugs that were really scary, because you'd hear them coming, there was nothing you could do. And one came down on a school, and that was terrible because it killed hundreds of little kids. And, well, more than just the children, but obviously it was a dreadful thing. I think that was Lewisham, I'm not 100% sure, but I think so.
Okay, what was it like as you got older and you were out sort of...
Dancing?
Yeah.
Oh, it was fun. It didn't stop us living by any means. When we came back again, we used to go dancing. And I can remember coming home one night and hearing all the shrapnel pinging on the pavement, not from bombs, from our guns. And I could hear them. And you just don't think, you know, if that hit me, that would have been hot and done a bit of damage. You just had to get used to living with it. And there was sometimes the buses would land up in a great big hole in the road where a bomb crate had gone, and the bus would get pushed in there, so you'd lose your transport again. But people had to go on living. There was a different feeling, sort of lived for today,